Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Sanabria, host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast and principal researcher at the Defenders Initiative. Welcome to this panel cast sponsored by Qmulos and Splunk. I have three guests with me today. Tu Lu, Chief Product Officer at Qmulos. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
And am I saying that correctly? Is it like the cloud, like the type of cloud, Qmulos?
Yeah, correct. Absolutely.
Great. We also have Lalisha Hurt, Splunk advisor at Splunk, with us as well. How are you, Lalisha?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Adrian.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the conversation. And last but not least, Lee Waskiewicz, VP Network and Security Strategy at ePlus, is joining us as well. How are you doing, Lee?
Doing great today. Thanks. Happy to be here. And you nailed the name, so one point for you already.
Yeah, that's why I asked ahead of time. I made sure to make a note on the name. My name is Sanabria, so I try to get other people's names right because mine is not the easiest either. So today we're talking about achieving continuous compliance and a resilient security posture. If you have a question during this webcast, you'll see a row of blue buttons at the bottom of your screen. You can select the Q&A button and submit a question that way. There's also a chat where you can chat with other attendees, or if you drop questions in there as well, we'll be checking that and we'll try to get to your question. And I also want to draw your attention to the second blue button from the right. That is the handouts button. And there are 3 handouts in there that you can download at any time during this panel cast. All right, let's jump into it. So I've been doing both security and compliance for a long time. I started my career at a large payment processor, so there was no shortage of compliance and regulations that we had to deal with there. And PCI DSS became a part of my life from 1.0 on. I was there at that organization before PCI and after PCI. And I remember at one point when I left that company and I became a PCI QSA, just sitting down and just going through all the requirements and thinking, can this be automated? You know, do we have to do this stuff manually? You know, and came to the conclusion that no, about 80%, and this is maybe 2010, I did this analysis. So even way back in 2010, I came to the conclusion that 80% of that compliance work could probably be fully automated. Lalisha, as we fast forward to today, I still see a lot of manual work going on. I still see a lot of people leaning on spreadsheets. What are some of the challenges you're seeing there? What are folks struggling with right now?
Yeah, that 80% is pretty high, even back in 2010, Adrian, and it's probably not too far off now, but I like to think that we've moved forward and implemented automation where it makes sense. But I do think the challenges are exactly what you said, right? People are still managing large data volumes across multiple frameworks. You mentioned PCI, but we have CMMC now, FISMA, RMF, you name it, DFARS, and that's the primary challenge, right? How do you manage all of that volume of data across multiple frameworks? As we know, manual processes, spreadsheets, and you can probably test it as Adrian from back in 2010, it takes time, right, to sift through and map. Given the volume and scale of data that's present in modern businesses and organizations today, a manual spreadsheet with hundreds or thousands of controls that takes weeks or months to complete is just no longer sufficient, right, given where we are. Centralized visibility into compliance gaps, status, and overall progress is another key challenge I see across the customers that I support. And you couple that with competing priorities and budgets and limited resources, specifically when we think about skilled governance, risk, and compliance professionals, right? These are rare professionals, but they're definitely needed in this space. Compliance targets are constantly shifting. You mentioned 1.0 at PCI back then. I can't keep up with where we are now with the versions. And unfortunately, organizations are still operating in silos, which can cause critical security events to be missed while creating gaps in tooling and process breakdowns. And at the end of the day, the impact is significant, right? Failure to comply with the applicable requirements in a timely manner can have financial consequences in the form of penalties, lost revenue, and even lost contracts, which I've seen happen from time to time, unfortunately.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, within our customer base, I think there's a lot of those similarities in terms of the manual processes, and also the sideload teams that are working to provide compliance. Where I think this is exacerbated in today's environment is companies aren't in the business necessarily of proving compliance. They're in the business to serve their customers, to make money, to disrupt industries, and to be successful. So compliance is a requirement, but it's not the company's primary objective. So at the pace that IT is moving to provide a more digital experience within their vertical or to their clients or constituents, this now offers rapid change that compliance has to keep up with. So when I say this, I mean where users are connecting from, where applications are being hosted to, what alignments and business partnerships are in place that compliance now extends itself to. So this manual effort, where when all the applications and all of the compute that was happening was more centralized, manual efforts were a lot easier to come by. But now, because of cloud, because of AI, because of all this innovation that's happening, the sprawl around exposure that compliance has to keep a handle on has been exponentially growing. So the manual efforts, I think, at this point are at their breaking point, and the automation tools are, to a certain degree, across the most side, struggling to keep up. And that's where, we see the room for improvement and where we can help to solve those challenges.
Yeah, for sure. And two, as Lee talks about the, how broadly compliance efforts have expanded as IT environments have expanded. Help me understand, help the audience understand what we mean when we say continuous compliance. Just like to define that continuous as opposed to what? What were we doing when it wasn't continuous?
Yeah, great question. So first, just 100% everything Lee and Alicia just said in terms of the challenges organizations are facing with compliance. I'll add one more aspect to it. Certainly super labor intensive, manual processes, inefficient. The other piece that's really important is no security value, right? When you hear the term, people always say compliance does not equal security. Well, that's because of how it's currently done, right? Manual processes, reviewing spreadsheets, looking at samples of data, right? So that gets to kind of your question, continuous compliance versus like how is it or has it been done before, right? So how it's been done before manually, because it's manual and labor intensive, you can't do it continuously, right? You're doing it maybe at best every quarter, maybe every 6 months, every year.
Right.
Government systems,
Point in time audits.
Point in time audits. So not only point in time, but you're not looking at everything, right? Because it's manual, you're taking samples. So where auditors and assessors are looking at actual technical evidence, because they don't have the platform or the automation, they're looking at samples of things rather than everything, right? So that's kind of the two pieces to it. Continuous compliance, so I would add continuous and comprehensive compliance, right? Versus the old way of doing things manually, point in time, and looking at snapshots of log data, configuration data, versus collecting everything automatically, right? Automated collection of technical evidence, and then the dashboards and analytics to continuously look at that to detect when issues occur, when misconfigurations occur, when events occur that may impact your compliance posture and your security posture. So that's what we mean by continuous compliance, right? It's not a new concept. If you look at the first version of the risk management framework, NIST Special Publication 800-37, that came out in 2010, 14 years ago, and that had the 6 steps. The last step being continuous monitoring, right? So it's not a new concept, but kind of the approaches, the automation, and the technology probably wasn't quite ready at that time. There are systems and some people doing continuous monitoring, but really at a much smaller scale, not as comprehensive as what we can do today with data platforms like Splunk that have the automation and data collection, data integration capabilities.
Yeah, and something you said there, I think that's why I initially did this research on how much of PCI could be automated, because as a QSA, we used to have what I'd call customers would go into PCI panic mode, like a month before their next rock was due. They'd be like, "Oh, was there something we were supposed to be doing quarterly? There were biannual things, weren't they?" They just, had completely forgotten about PCI since the previous year. And as a consulting organization, I was thinking, we don't want them to go into this panic mode every year before we show up to do that analysis. So what could we do throughout the year to help them remember that stuff? And then that kind of naturally leads into, why wouldn't you just set up processes that are naturally gathering all this evidence, that are naturally doing all this stuff that you should be doing throughout the year, so you don't have to have a reminder in your calendar to go out and do it manually, right?
100%. Yeah, that is, in a nutshell, continuous compliance. Right? You're always ready for an audit at any time because you're doing it continuously.
And Lalisha, coming back to you too, was just talking about how in an ideal world, compliance work and security improvements would be the same thing, but often they're not. What can we do here? How can we bring the two closer together so that we're not doing too much extra work in each area that's not benefiting the other?
Yeah, great question. And you're right that in an ideal world, compliance and security would align perfectly. But I think in practice, what we see sometimes is they pull in different directions. And so, as we know, compliance often focus on, I think as Tu mentioned, kind of meeting specific regulatory requirements, which can be very process and documentation heavy, while security aims to kind of protect data and systems, which is a broader, more dynamic discipline. However, there are ways to bring the two together so that they kind of reinforce each other rather than create extra work. And so for starters, mapping security controls to compliance requirements by integrating frameworks to streamline the process can help. Adopting a risk-based approach to really help focus on the things that are most critical, that require attention based on the potential impact to the organization. Automation, we can't say this enough, automation, right, of security and compliance tasks where you can, to save on that 80% of manual labor that you mentioned there. And then we just talked about continuous, right? Focus on continuous monitoring. It's not a one-time and done initiative, right? This should be ongoing, and leveraging security as a framework for compliance is also a step in the right direction. And I see this convergence happening, particularly with healthcare organizations. So just for example, healthcare systems use tools that continuously monitor things like patient data for unauthorized access or potential breaches. Any attempt to access sensitive information outside of authorized channels, it actually triggers an automatic alert, allowing immediate investigation and response. Another area when we think about access control management, their systems continuously tracking user access, right, and maintaining strict policies regarding who can access what data, ensuring that only the right people have access to what they need, in particular sensitive patient information. If our user roles change in this space, right, the system automatically updates their access privileges. And the list goes on, right? You could talk about employee training, right? That's a big requirement for HIPAA. And so a continuous compliance system would ensure that every employee, right, takes refresher courses per HIPAA requirements, and that's automated and tracked for you. And then lastly, I'll just mention audit logs, right? Continuously recording and auditing user activity, which is huge. And I can't think of any framework or regulatory requirement where this is not a listed control, right? You want to be able to show who's doing what, when, and be able to be audit ready at any given time. So these are just a few pointed examples of how organizations are bringing security and compliance closer together.
Yeah. And then coming back to you, too, I think you have a case study to share with us that's kind of aligned with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I've got a couple of different case studies, but for the sake of time, I think I'll touch on one of them. I'm glad Alicia brought up the point of audit logs, because that is related to one of the case studies. And that is such a fundamental piece of it, right? When we talk about continuous monitoring, continuous compliance. It's all data driven, right? And are you collecting the data to enable you to do that continuous monitoring, continuous assessment of compliance? And if you don't have the data, none of this can happen. And one of the case studies we have for folks who have heard of an OMB standard or executive order that came out a couple of years ago, M2131, basically an executive order for all of the federal civilian agencies to collect a variety of log data from all of their systems, tools, platforms, cloud service providers, and so forth, right? And I think it's a great standard. I mean, it's very comprehensive, covers a lot of different areas, event types, event families. But that's sort of the first step. That's the foundation to achieve continuous compliance. Right? You have to collect these things, and that standard or that executive order has done a great job of just laying out all of the critical events, event types down to the field level that you need to be collecting on your systems. And so one of our case studies revolves around that. So as I mentioned, that's a standard or an executive order that's been pushed out to all of the civilian government agencies, and they define basically 4 levels of logging maturity from level 0 to level 3. And we had a large agency that came to us and asked us to help them basically assess where they were, identify their gaps, and then help them onboard the necessary data to help them achieve level 3. So we came in, they're an existing, so they're a Splunk and Qmulos customer, right? So we came in with a combined solution using Splunk as the underlying platform and our Q compliance solution on top of Splunk to help them, as I mentioned, assess where their logging capabilities are today, assess where their gaps are with regards to the specific event types, events, and fields that are required in the M2131 executive order, and identify the specific gaps, and then create basically a set of actions to remediate those gaps. So we were able to help them achieve level 3 in record time. So they are probably one, if not the only agency that has met the level 3 logging maturity level within the deadline that was laid out in the M2131 executive order. And now they've built out a great foundation for all of the other use cases and capabilities we're talking about, right? With continuous compliance, improving security, and so forth. So getting that auditing capability in is really kind of the foundational step.
Yeah. Alicia, so thinking about the people quotient here, the relationship between compliance folks and security ops folks. Obviously, with Splunk, compliance folks need logs, need access to logs. Security ops needs access to logs. I kind of vaguely remember having to, pester both groups for things coming in as an external auditor. So I don't typically think of compliance as creating a burden for security operations folks, but maybe it does. So help me understand the relationship between these two different groups and how the overhead of compliance needs can be alleviated here.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And what I would say, Adrian, is compliance doesn't have to be a burden on security, but it can often feel like one sometimes. And I think the true key to alleviating the burden is understanding that compliance and security are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they go hand in hand. And so when we think about the two groups and how they work together, I think it's important to understand the function of both, right? Compliance folks are typically involved with meeting specific legal, regulatory, industry standards, such as the ones we mentioned previously. These standards are put in place to actually protect the data systems and ensure certain practices are followed. When we think about security operations, on the other hand, That's kind of where the handoff happens, I would say, or the handshake, if you will, because they're focused on actually protecting the organization, systems, data, and users from those cyber threats. And this includes things like threat detection, incident response, vulnerability management, risk assessments, all of which are probably in many of those frameworks as controls. And so it's almost important that those two groups work together. In many cases, compliance requirements align with security best practices. For example, encryption is often required by regulations like HIPAA and PCI DSS. Access controls, for example, are mandated by GDPR if you're in Europe, and other privacy laws. And then the audit trails, like I mentioned earlier, they're a requirement in just about every compliance framework, right, to ensure data integrity and accountability. So I don't think you can get away from that. However, there are instances where I think compliance can definitely feel like a burden on security teams, because it does often involve maintaining a sense of documentation. You got to, have all these manual processes and proven adherence to regulatory requirements, which seems redundant and adds administrative overhead. But what I would say to alleviate that, and I think we've probably been sharing this theme throughout, is you want to get away from those manual process. You want to automate, right? Automate things like auditing, monitoring, patch management, access control, right? And you can do that with capabilities and platforms like Splunk and Qmulos. Integrating compliance and security frameworks so you don't have to manage multiple ones, right? You should have a comprehensive framework that you can align your compliance regulations to, right? And the government, we focus a lot on, NIST 853, NIST Cybersecurity framework, and I'm sure there's others, but this can help with addressing both security and compliance requirements in a holistic manner. So those are just a couple examples.
If I can just add to that, because that's a common theme that we hear from our customers a lot, right? Is that compliance is a burden to the security operations team, and not just the security team, the development team, system administrators, and so forth. Right? That goes back to kind of the old manual ways of doing things, right? Doing data calls. Give me samples of logs from Active Directory. Give me samples of your application logs. And when you have several audits because you have to implement multiple compliance mandates throughout the year, that really takes up a lot of time, right? And actually, a lot of times we've had a lot of customers who have come to us. The security operations team, they're the ones that come to us first. Even though we offer compliance solutions, it's the security operations or the security engineering team who come to us and buy us first, because they want to alleviate some of the burden that the compliance
get these guys off my back. Yeah,
exactly, right. So yeah, it's all the same data, right? It's all the same data that you're pulling from your systems, your networks, your applications. But we're looking at it from a compliance lens, right? So when you've got a platform like Splunk that's supporting multiple use cases, security compliance use cases, and other use cases, it's the same data. You're just applying different lenses to that data, right? So that's where we come in. It's the same data. We apply the compliance lens because we know what the auditors are looking for, and we're able to pull that out and provide the analytics so that the security operations folks, the development folks, they're not doing the manual data calls to serve the auditor's needs. So that's where we can alleviate some of that burden on the security ops folks and development folks. And then more importantly, really at the end of the day, provide actual security value, right? Because you're looking at things in real time, you're detecting compliance issues in real time that can ultimately impact your security posture.
Yeah, and speaking of security posture, and something Lalisha was saying, talking about automating things. Lalisha mentioned automating patching. Like there's maybe it's a bit of a stereotype, but I kind of think of them as two different brains. The security op folks are more the ADHD brain that focus well when something's on fire, and the compliance side, more focused. Let's find some gaps. Let's do something about we've got some gaps here. Making sure things are prepared. So maybe that you have less fires in the future. Like one example, I was advising a company the other day, and they were talking about just the breadth of patches and vulnerability management that they had. And I had them just share their screen, share some of these spreadsheets with me, and they had all kinds of software installed and running on like printer software running on web servers, for example. Like, why is this here? Is this just a default Red Hat enterprise server installation? And almost every compliance standard you go out and look at says remove unnecessary services and software, right? Like your vulnerability management dashboard, these fires that you're having to put out would be so much less if you took off all the software that's not being used. You're spending so much time chasing down and patching stuff that doesn't need to be there in the first place.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah, we the way we think of it, compliance done right is proactive security. Right. So you've got this structured approach, this structured framework of, people think of controls as compliance requirements. We look at them as just requirements, security requirements, functional requirements, things, the proper capabilities you need to build into your systems, right? And if you are proactively doing those things from the beginning, as you mentioned, you're not going to be fighting these fires at the end or doing audits, right? So doing compliance right gives you security and proactive security. That's kind of what we tell our customers.
Yeah. And Lee, coming back to you, talking about continuous compliance again, speed, I think, is very much a factor here. Maybe less so for compliance. Obviously for audits, we want to be looking at the most up-to-date information, which is really what security operations wants as well. Is there another opportunity for these things to align here in trying to have the most up-to-date information for both groups?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so yeah, we've said a few times when security operations is the nerve center, right? So their job in life is to detect and respond to cyber risk to the organization. So there's less things that are applicable for old data, right? Old data maybe for traditional low and slow types of attacks and be able to define those patterns, those abilities, but as security operations centers modernize, we work with a lot of companies helping them to understand how to leverage modern security operations tool sets that includes aspects of orchestration automation as well as next gen detection features that's able to provide that point in time approach that can then get fed back into a compliance program. So as we've been talking, these manual efforts are exactly that. They're a snapshot in time. Yes, we can do a better job of automation and pulling these data sets in, but the security operations are what's on the by the minute, by the second changes. And that could either positively or negatively impact the compliance scores. So the ability to stay within compliance based on that ever-changing and dynamic nature of server functionality and availability, whether it's users and access control, all the controls that compliance is checking on, they're the real-time aspect of how that control is being used, abused, or not even found is at the heart of what's happening in the security operations team. So that alignment is crucial. And to what the others have said around, security operations teams feeling the burden of providing that aspect of compliance, I think if done correctly and if leveraging, again, automated software tools and processes that are in place, it could actually alleviate that burden on the security operations team while at the same time creating a very positive impact on the compliance teams and what they're having to measure. So I think that alignment is key. And what we're finding is as organizations are exploring these options, facilitating the dialogue of these stakeholders together is crucial to finding a path to success, because we want to make sure that the voices and concerns of each individual department from a compliance standpoint and an ops standpoint are understood. We can better ensure that the processes and then ultimately the technology that's applied are meeting and hopefully exceeding those needs with software like Splunk and Qmulos.
Yeah. And I imagine as new technologies, just as a follow-up here, come into play, Like a lot of the advisory calls I've had this year have been on like Microsoft Copilot, some of the new AI tools coming in, and people trying to figure out, okay, how does this apply to compliance? How do we include this stuff? So how much of a wrench does that throw in the works when a new technology comes out and you don't know exactly how to apply it or pull it into the existing compliance, or on the security operations side as well? Like how do we monitor their use of this? How do we know if good things or bad things are happening with AI now that these tools have suddenly popped up all over the enterprise?
Yeah, what we're finding is
privacy concern. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, Lee, and then we'll come to you too after Lee.
Okay. Yeah. So I was going to say that we're looking at treating these AI co-pilots and other new applications as just that. It's another application, but what we're finding is that the data that it has access to, whereas in a traditional application, that data is purposefully being delivered to that application for use. AI now opens up the opportunity where it's discovering data and finding ways to use that data in its responses that if the permissions and other pieces aren't set correctly, it's giving you answers to things you never know you maybe had access to in the first place. And that's where a lot of this danger is. So from our standpoint, working with clients around this, the visibility to what data that application is gaining access to, how users are engaging with that application on a daily basis, but whether it's sanctioned, unsanctioned, whether it's a private instance versus a public instance, are all helping to carve that out. But it's just like we see in every sort of new technology leap, there's always a shadow IT initiative that users are going to find a way to go after and use that new tool or new process. So visibility out of the gate is key so that organizations can be better armed and the security team can be better prepared with applying the right security controls to that. And a lot of it comes down through the visibility that these platforms are able to provide.
Yeah, and two, you had a point here as well.
I think Lee covered it well, 100% everything
Okay.
Lee just said. Just the visibility is key, right? And as technology evolves, you need a platform, you need capabilities, you need automation to provide you that level of visibility as technologies evolve, as the regulations evolve. That's everything we've been talking about.
Right, so now I want to kind of open it up to all three of you. I'm going to start with you, Lalisha. Help me out with some examples here. What are some things folks can do to implement real-time compliance that also makes security better?
Yeah, so selfishly, I'll start out with, proactive threat detection and incident response. So, making sure that you have a centralized platform that helps you aggregate logs and security events across the organization's IT infrastructure in real time, right? To mention this all goes back to data, right? But you can't have data all over the place in different systems. You want to make sure it's kind of consolidated. And then using that machine learning and AI, right, to help you, as Lee mentioned, kind of detect those anomalies, identify potential threats, and provide automated alerts for immediate action, right? By integrating threat detection with compliance, I've seen organizations not only just, stay compliant with regulatory environments, but they're able to respond proactively to security incidents in their environment. And that's the true goal here. I think also, I know I keep going back to this because I think if people hear it 5 or 6 times, it'll resonate, but the automation of those compliance and security workflows, right, just to really enable the automation of those repetitive tasks that can be burdensome, as we talked about previously for the team. So any opportunities to take those things off the plate for your employees to give them more time to focus on value-added work, I think is truly valuable. And the benefit here is, as we all know, it leads to faster response time, hopefully fewer errors because you're removing the human aspect out of those manual processes, and hopefully lower costs, right? Allowing security and compliance team to truly focus on high value strategic initiatives for the organization. Visibility, I know I heard that briefly as well. Having the data is one thing, but having visibility into it is another. So making sure that you have capabilities in place where you can kind of see what's happening in your environment, and not just from a security perspective, but from an IT operations network. You should have a holistic view, right, of your environment. And this is one of the areas that I feel like is an opportunity, because we tend to just focus on security and our tooling in that space, but we neglect the network, we neglect infrastructure or our IT operations, which is where our adversaries are trying to gain access into the systems. And then lastly, I'll just say, hey, be audit ready at all times, right? It's a continuous process. At any given time, someone could ask to see something or show something. So you want to make sure you have a centralized, maybe GRC platform or tool to help you do just that. And so at a click of a button, you can provide those reports and evidence and things that they need to satisfy those requirements. So those are just a few, Adrian. I'm sure there's others if anyone wants to add to that.
And but before we move on, I just wanted to echo something. You gave a lot of great advice there, but the one I want to highlight is having the data and having the ability to do something with that data. I think 100% of the breaches that I've analyzed and I've done postmortems on, I do talks about breaches. That it's kind of like my hobby on the side. I think 100% of the time they had evidence of the attack happening, but a human didn't see it. So like it doesn't count if you're collecting all the right data if a human doesn't see something and have the ability and the plan to respond to it effectively, right?
Absolutely. And that's the monitoring piece, right? You can have the data, you can have the platform, but if someone's not actively monitoring that, or you don't have it set up for automated alerts, right, to take action, that's where the big misses are. So that's a really good point.
And Lee, coming to you next. Any good stories, anecdotes here, anything people can do to implement compliance that also makes security better?
Yeah, I think the challenge that we see is around determining the driver for the implementation. Security, often when we're working with clients and they're checking off the boxes against their NIST, CSF, or other frameworks, right? They're working to prioritize their risk, apply those right controls. Something like real-time compliance and furthering security operations maybe doesn't get the highlighted priority that it needs. But I think the deciding factor here, we talk about it in cyber all the time, is the shortage of skilled resources. So the more that we can free up the skilled resources we have for not preparing for these just-in-time audits that are coming in, that's the calculation that we've worked with customers a number of times to help them see that the time saved by the resources that they're able to have and retain is certainly outweighed by the value that the investments in these platforms provides. So we see it as a way to multiply the abilities of the resources that the customer has, as well as be able to provide, as others have mentioned, increased accuracy and automation, and the ability to faster detection and response. When we're left to work on the manual processes and we're work to not put these people in a position, or the resources in a position to do those higher level tasks, we also risk the loss of, or the threat of non-retainment to the organization. And in an environment where the talent gap is so high, we want to make sure that we keep motivated the best of the best that the organization would have, and be able to free them up for those higher level tasks. So that's kind of what we see from our lens in consulting with customers is, yes, many times they understand that there's a value to be had, but it's helping them realize and put together the dollars and cents cost analysis and the ROI to the business around being able to put a program like this in place. And that many times has then helped bridge the gap between the CISO, the CIO, and oftentimes the CFO, for helping to make sure that budgets are opened up to be able to further these endeavors.
Great. And just to the audience, now is a great time to get in any questions, if you have any questions. And two, coming to you with the same question here, tackling compliance and security.
Yeah, I'll start with an example, going back to the point you made earlier about having the data and being ready with the data. And if done right, continuously collecting that data, having the visibility doing that in real time, how that can be mutually beneficial to both security and compliance, right? So taking a specific example, a couple of years ago with the Log4j vulnerability that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, right? So that came out, and there were active attacks, people exploiting that, and that had the security teams panicking, chaos, trying to figure out where they're vulnerable to those attacks, right? But if you look at it from a compliance lens, there are controls around software inventory management, SBOM, software bill of materials.
Yeah.
If organizations were implementing those controls and continuously monitoring those things in real time, immediately you could detect which assets, which systems have that Log4j vulnerability, and direct the security operations, respond activities to those specific assets, right? So that's where if compliance done right can help things on the security side, and sort of vice versa. What can be done from the security side to help the compliance side of things. So if you look at a control standard, a framework like NIST 800-53, that's massive, right? That's like over 1,000 controls. And we get this question from customers a lot. They hear about the benefits of everything we're talking about: continuous compliance, continuous automation, continuous monitoring of things. But where do they start, right? Like 1,000 controls. You're not going to continuously assess, continuously monitor 1,000 controls from the get-go. Right? So don't boil the ocean. So how can we prioritize that? That's where some of the activities on the security operations side can inform which controls are the critical controls, priority controls that you want to be continuously monitoring, right? So, looking at analyzing threat intel and attacks from the MITRE attack perspective, right? Identifying the specific TTPs that are being leveraged in those attacks. And then there are mappings of those to different controls, right? So that can help you really in real time dynamically adapt what you're doing on the compliance side in terms of which controls have the most impact on your true risk, right? Looking at the threats that are coming in that the SOC analysts are looking at, and oftentimes with a piece of threat intel, it will tell you which TTPs from the MITRE attack frameworks are being used there, right? And like I said, there are mappings of those to different NIST 800-53 controls, other controls. And from that, you can prioritize from the compliance side which controls are more important to your organization, right, to reduce the overall risk and attack surface and so forth. So just a couple of examples of how to get started, where to prioritize, which controls to continuously monitor, which controls to sort of start with on this compliance automation journey. And I'll just throw in. Go ahead.
I love what you're highlighting there, because a lot of compliance says follow industry best practices, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of space there. You can certainly comply with the absolute minimum of what is required, but there's also a lot of room to pull lessons learned from other failures that occur in the industry, attacker TTPs. We have more information than ever about how bad things happen, right? And I love the Log4j example, because if you go back, so that was December 2021. If you go back another 4 years from that to the Equifax breach, that was Struts, which was also a small Java library, and this is a hard problem, like having a software asset inventory down to the level of Java libraries, which is just a single file sitting somewhere in a web server, is a hard problem to solve. But that is a lesson that we, long before Log4j, we should have learned from Equifax's failure, because ultimately, if people don't know the full story there, they knew Struts was an issue. They knew about the vulnerability. They sent an email out to 214 people across the security organization, said, drop everything. If you find Struts anywhere, it needs to be updated within 48 hours. Everybody dropped everything. They looked for it. they failed to find it. They just didn't have the ability. Finding a small Java library is hard. They didn't have the right tooling for it. They didn't have the right training for it. They just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And ideally after that, you would say, oh, we should have a database where I can just do a lookup and say, do we have struts? If so, where is it? But we didn't learn from that lesson. And I suspect even Log4j, a lot of organizations still would fail that exercise if they went out and tried to find a small Java library in a large corporate environment.
Yeah, great point. And good lesson learned from that. And what the federal government has done in response to that, in typical fashion, how they respond to these things, a new piece of compliance regulation, right? So in 22, so there's another OMB executive order, M2218, right, focused around software supply chain, secure software development, and one of the requirements there is for vendors to be producing software bill of materials. I mentioned that earlier, SBOM, software bill of materials. So if you're tracking things down to that level of granularity, that is when you can start identifying where you have specific Java libraries or other third-party libraries in your code base. And that is one of the capabilities that we're able to support and provide a visibility and continuous monitoring over is down to that SBOM level for your software inventory.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that's a great takeaway. The fact that compliance can do more. That there is room to take these lessons learned from actual incidents, and maybe work with the security operations team, and elevate what compliance can do for security a little bit.
Absolutely.
Right. This has been great. Thanks again to Lalisha and Lee for joining me today. It's wonderful having you all here. I enjoyed all the stories you shared, all your responses to the questions here. And again, thanks to our sponsors, Qmulos and Splunk, for making today's webcast possible. And finally, a big thanks to the audience for joining us. We'll see you next time.